Okay, Space Force. Is this just a giant PR stunt? Is this something that we really should do? Well, let's take a look at it and find out. Welcome back to T2 Politics. Space Force. It's in the news today. Vice President Mike Pence went out to the Pentagon to go talk about Space Force. And he tried to lay out the case for what Space Force will be. And that was basically, it was going to be a new branch of the military, and it was going to oversee some personnel, not really in action, although he did kind of allude to a special forces kind of based on operations in space. And then, but mostly it's going to be satellite defense and offensive satellites, and really building into this. And if you've looked at a lot of the opinions in the news today, you kind of go two ways. Some people think it's a good idea and this is where things are headed, and I'm kind of in that camp. I think right now it's borderline that we may need this. Now we know this is in direct response to only two nations, China and Russia. Now China and Russia both have good space programs. I mean, we send our astronauts up using Russian rockets for the last few years, but both countries have been heavily into anti-satellite and laser production to mess with our satellites. And considering the United States is by far the most heavily invested in communication satellites in space, and a lot of our defense battle net that we have been developing over the last 20 years is all located in space. Now, I don't know how much you would know about orbital mechanics, but most of these objects are more or less fixed in space. They don't really move around at all. And this makes them very vulnerable to optical lasers to either damage the sensitive camera equipment or to blind them. I know China's been working on systems like that in the past. But a new type of weapon has really come to the forefront where the United States, China, and Russia are all kind of in this arms race to get hyperspeed missiles. And these are missiles that go above Mach 5. Now, China has already shown that they can blow a satellite out of the sky. They did it to one of their own satellites 5 or 6 years ago. And this is actually an example that Mike Pence brought up today in his speech. Now, another example of kind of the weaponization of space that's been going on was that a few years ago, Russia was shooting a satellite into space, but when the boosters came off of the rocket, one of them actually opened up the door and ejected a small satellite with an arm. Now, what this satellite has been doing is it can kind of roam around, and they believe that the arm would be able to grab one of our satellites and maybe either hack into it or disable it, throw it off of its orbit, and more or less junk our satellites. And there's also the additional threat of smaller countries like North Korea or maybe Iran in the next decade, if they get a nuclear bomb, detonating a nuclear bomb into the upper atmosphere. And this would destroy our power grid through the EMP effect. And if you've looked at the estimates of an attack like that, blowing out the national power grid, estimates could be range from anywhere from 60 to 90% of the American population would die off without electricity and the food that we would get from it and all the infrastructure that we use for this. So I feel like this is something that is going to be needed in the future. The question is it going to be needed right now? And I believe yes. And here's the reason. Now, if you look at most of the people who are against this, they are saying that they're against this because it's just going to add more bureaucracy, that's going to waste more money, and it's not going to be as efficient as what they are in the Air Force right now. Now, Vice President Pence and I guess Trump and Mattis are looking at a $8 billion initial budget for Space Force. And this would remove Space Command and its 30,000 personnel over to a new branch called Space Force. And it would expand it, and they would have their own general, and they would have their own civilian liaison to the Defense Department, just like any other branch would. And they'd probably have a Joint Chiefs section. And they want to have all this up and running by 2020 with congressional approval. Now, I have no clue if Congress would approve something like this, but if you look at some people who have been in Space Command in the past, they've actually brought up the point that they've been asking for this for 15 or 16 years. And I believe a lot of the reason is that the Air Force is focused on the Air Force. For that $8 billion investment, they could buy in the neighborhood between 70 and 80 F-35 planes. And that's what the Air Force bread and butter is. It's planes, it's fighter jets, it's personnel, it's replacement equipment. And I feel like as Space Command and the threats in space get larger, that's going to take up more and more of the Air Force's budget. And everybody goes, oh, well, that's okay. That's just a natural progression of the Air Force. But there's always going to be a need for ground-based defenses and in-atmosphere orbital or in-atmosphere fighter jets. And Space Command would really work outside of the atmosphere. It would roll up NASA, probably some of our civilian contractors. And I think you'd see a lot in the way of hypervelocity missiles in space as well. And some of the other, Star Wars from Reagan, I believe Bush tried to get something called the Hammer of God or Warhammer, where these are essentially 1-ton steel rods that would be launched from a satellite passively. But the strike that it would take, the kinetic strike on Earth, would equal that of a nuclear bomb without the radiation. And these are things that we're worried that China or Russia are developing now, along with lasers, where we're all in this kind of new age weapons race where Russia and China have decided they're not going to compete with us on the water and subs and Air Force. They're just too far behind. And anything that they did, any national project that they did to kind of ramp up production to meet the United States, it'd be too much for any nation. So they've decided to leapfrog and go straight to space-based weaponry. Now, if you've kind of looked into space-based weaponry before, this is kind of a game changer. These are strategic weapons. These are not tactical weapons that you would use on a battlefield every day, but they could really wipe out a nation easily. So I think this is something that's going to be needed. And even though right now it's borderline, I believe in the future you're going to see more and more weapon systems coming online. You're going to see kinetic weapons, you're going to see energy weapons, read lasers. And, you're going to need more offensive satellites and defensive satellites that can move and can engage. And you're really going to have another edge. And I think also if you look at the space plane that NASA's been, or the Air Force have been very, very quiet about, that will go up and spend 18 months, 2 years flying around the planet. And I know there's a lot of worry that the United States has been falling behind. I don't really believe that's the case. A lot of these technologies that Russia and China are featuring, they've really focused their effort on one particular weapon. And they're trying to see that fruition and to get it out and before the United States can. But if you look at what the United States has been doing in its weapons research, it's not just for a single weapon. It's for a whole new weapons system. So when we come out with our hypervelocity missiles, they're looking at doing planes, they're looking at doing missiles, and there's just a lot more, kind of a full suite of systems. But this is also kind of putting us behind the case. Now, when it comes out, we will have greater capability, but in the short term, it's kind of putting us a little bit behind the edge. And where this really gets dangerous is that a hypervelocity missile really cannot be stopped by current ballistic anti-missile systems that we have. Our missile shield would not really be able to stop a hypervelocity missile moving at least 5 times the speed of sound. So this is kind of my point, is that we're going to need this in the future, and this is going to eat up more and more. And I could really see Space Force becoming more of a space navy, because as our technology develops, we're going to look more and more to space. NASA has programs that they want to go out and collect an asteroid and bring it back here. You're going to look at asteroid mining. And 50% of all satellites are from the United States. Our TV, our communication satellites, all of this is in space and it is essentially unguarded. There's nothing we can do if China or Russia decided to shoot some missiles at it and take out our satellites. So that is what they're really looking at changing here. So I believe this is going to be needed. that the Air Force is always going to be focused on the Air Force, and the Space Force is really going to work above atmosphere, and they're going to be their own lobbying firm. And these people are right. It is going to add more bureaucracy. It is going to waste some more money, but I think it is something that is definitely going to be needed in the future. So where I really have a problem with this is where, if you look at what President Trump has been doing, and something that they released today, is that they are going to allow people on their website, and members of kind of their supporters are going to be able to vote on logos for Space Force. I don't know if these would be official logos, but what they're going to do is they're going to produce t-shirts and gears for Space Force for fundraising for their political campaigns coming up. And I really feel like this is doing a disservice to, kind of the fledgling service that they're trying to create here, because it creates the air that this is all a giant PR stunt. I don't believe it is. This is something that is going to be needed in the future. And like I said, I believe it's kind of borderline right now, but it will be needed. And just the simple fact of Trump going over and creating kind of this PR buzz and selling merchandise is really turning the whole thing into a joke. And he's really doing a disservice to something that I believe is really needed here in the future. So that's my take on it. Go ahead, if you want to continue this discussion, go ahead and leave a comment down in the bottom. If you think I'm an idiot and we don't need it, or you think it's really imperative that it's needed right now, go ahead and place some comments below, like, share this video. Let's get a conversation going. Also, go ahead and visit my Facebook page. There's a link down in the description. And remember, subscribe, like, and share for more videos like this. And if there's any videos you would like me to kind of comment, or news stories you'd like for me to comment on in the future, go ahead and let me know, and we'll go ahead and we'll work that out. So everybody have a nice night, and go Space Force.